现场的朋友还有线上的朋友，大家晚上好。然后欢迎大家来收看或者是来收听今天的科技艺术典藏，然后 The Path Toward Conserving Net Art 通往网络艺术保存与维护途径。OK，那我是科技艺术典藏基础计划的主持人雨轩，来自香港的连线。然后现在跟我一起在线上的还有来自德国的计划伙伴子权。然后今天重要的讲
雨轩，
者，我们现在声音是不是有回收的状况
雨轩，你要把你那个 YouTube 的声音先关掉，
？OK，
就不会有回缩。
好，我要重来一次吗
不用。
？OK，好，继续，抱歉，技术问题。那科技艺术典藏基础计划其实从去年开始一系列的讲座，然后和概念美术馆的第一档的策展，到今年其实也是由于成员各奔东西的缘故，然后所以希望利用这个计划，我们邀请国外的讲者和真正常年在研究典藏科技艺术的这些美术馆从业人员和研究者来给台湾带来更深入的经验分享。然后我们昨天其实在测试连线的时候，就遇到了很多问题。然后其实后来在想，这非常契合 NetArt 的这个主题，不管是我们使用的平台，然后以前习惯使用的方式，跟现在使用的方式。然后像网络预测，它其实就是原生在这样的数位资料和工具的框架当中。所以当我们提到要典藏的时候，我们传统想到的是，要维持这个对象或者是物件的原貌。那我们在进行保存和修复的时候，其实也是希望维持这个物件的原貌，或是把这个物件修复到过去的某个时间点。可是当面对网络艺术的时候，最大的问题是，这到底是可能的吗？或者是说，这对于网络艺术来说是合乎常理的吗？那如果我们真的硬生生的把网络艺术它脱离了它原生在网络的这个环境的话，那它还是网络艺术吗？所以，其实这一连串的问题在欧洲、美国这些比较早开始研究的国家已经探讨了20-30年，从录像然后到软体艺术，一直到网络艺术，其实是真的是近几年才开始有。譬如说，我们今天请到的Anna Decker，来自荷兰姆斯特丹大学的教授，他是在去年才出版了这本Collecting and Conserving Net Art Moving Beyond Conventional Methods 这本书。那接下来另外两场，古根汉那边比较有系统性的，真的很用 conservation standard 去做net art 的 restoration， 则是在2015年的时候才开始，所以这真的都是近几年才开始发生的事情。那其实会发现到说，不管 software base 还是 net art 的典藏，有更多它并不是来自于博物馆或者是科班的文物修复，它更多是来自对于媒材本身更熟悉的 production 或是 curation 领域的从业人员跟研究者。试着去从数位媒介以及网络媒介的本质，回去再去观看，再诠释传统的保存观念。所以其实我们算是个人私心，这次能够请到 Anna Decker 是非常难得。然后他就是长期从担任独立策展人、研究者，然后关注数位档案化还有资讯资料的角度，他的这本书可以说是我自己所看过的一些研究当中第一本系统性的有关收藏网络艺术的专书。那我们今年跟子权5月去 AIC 的时候，也跟Anna 才有第一次的照面，所以我就让他自己来介绍自己。OK，那我现在先请子权来跟大家说明一下，我们等一下线上进行的方式。
Hello，大家好，跟大家介绍一下，就是我们今天关于今天讲座有一个 Q&A 的部分，我们会用 Slido 这个网站来进行发问。然后等一下大家可以看到投影画面上的那个网址 Slido 的网址，然后旁边会有一个今天的代码7036，然后你只要进到这个网站里面，输入这个代码之后，就可以进到我们提问的版面。那 就是在讲座的过程中，大家都可以直接进行留言的提问。另外，因为今天没有额外的翻译人员，所以请大家就是尽可能都直接用英文提问。那因为讲者他也会看到这个网站上面的问题，所以他也可以直接在讲座的过程中可以直接回答。那如果真的比较不方便用英文去留言的话，我们也会直接在网站上面翻译成英文，然后给讲者这样子。那这次也是我们第一次尝试这样子多方的连线，所以中间如果有一些技术的问题，还请大家多多包涵。那我们现在就欢迎我们今天的讲者 Annette。Welcome to Annette.
Welcome, Anna Decker. You can
Hi,
start.
both. Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you very much for this wonderful invitation. I'm very happy to be speaking to you about net art. And particularly, in a way, it poses the challenges for the conservation of these particular artworks. So I think you told already a little bit about my background, but maybe to make it a little bit more, I started actually over 20 years ago as a curator of new media art, as it was called in the days. And it was only since about 10 years or so that I became more interested in the conservation of net art. And that was particularly because I was working at the time at the Netherlands Media Art Institute in Amsterdam, a gallery very much dedicated to video art and media art. And I've been working there for for about 10 years. And I was producing exhibition and event and workshops one after the other. And I wanted to delve more into sort of more research practice. So at that time, quite a few artists approached me that their artworks were disappearing online due to all kinds of things that were happening. So I thought it would be a really good idea to start thinking about how to preserve these artworks for the future. And so I started indeed working as a PhD student at Goldsmiths in London and looking into how to preserve or conserve these art practices. So perhaps as a little bit of a start, what do I actually mean when I talk about net art? I have to say I describe it very much as a set of creative practices that are built on a number of innovative processes that are both formal and contingent, and they're functioning through systems, networks, design, and histories. They're influenced and executed by other processes and also by users. There's a lot of participatory artworks. So this may include technology, but it's not necessarily restricted to it. It's foremost, I believe, about seeing systems and situations as a medium. So what this means is perhaps best explained by showing you two examples. I have to see how this goes because I'm using a slightly different format than I normally use. Okay, hang on. Let's go back. Yeah. So the first example is a screenshot, a very bad screenshot, I have to say, of the work Summer by Olia Lialina. She made the work in 2013, and the work is basically a GIF, a graphics interface format. But it's a GIF that moves according to the speed of the various networks. If you look at the address bar, I'm not sure if you can see it, but you'll notice once you play the work, that each frame connects to a different address, each featuring the extension Olia/Summer. So we go to the next slide now. The work is distributed actually across 25 websites, all hosting different interlinking frames. So while Summer, the work, is initiated by Olia Lialina, it keeps functioning and moving by 25 others. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see the whole lineup of all the different participants. And the swing of her movement actually moves according to the connection speed of the particular websites. So in a sense, each person is part owner of this work. They're all hosting one Summer page on their server. And sometimes, as you can see in the next slide here, there is an error. And in the next slide, and I'm sorry, this is in Dutch actually, so you won't be able to read it, but you'll probably recognize the signage that there is no connection. So what it tells you is that the work Summer leads to multiple stakeholders. And that, of course, raises many important questions relating to collecting and acquisitioning these kinds of works. For example, when acquiring a networked artwork that relies on other people or audience participation, who will be able to claim their percentage of the purchase price? The artist, the audience who contributed parts of the work, or other parties in the network structure? Could such an offer itself be perhaps seen as an intervention and become part of the work? So considering the function of, for example, computer algorithms adds a completely different aspect to the notion of authorship and further complicates the determination of authenticity. Here, the question becomes rather than who, what creates the work. In other words, the authenticity of the author is not a fixed position anymore. Now, I won't be talking about authenticity today, but you can read more about that in the book as well, and how I explore this notion in the sense of net art. So to continue, Summer, in a way, really foregrounds and thematizes the network, reflecting its dispersive nature and unstable condition. While this work can be seen as a networked artwork that is fully dependent on the internet, in my second example, I will focus on a work that circulates in different on and offline spaces. So this is the work YouTube as Subject by Constant Dullard. In 2008, Constant made a series of animated videos with the YouTube play button as its subject. The play button was positioned against the black background of a loading YouTube video. And the image starts trembling as if suddenly an earthquake happens. It bounces from side to side, or it's changing colors, it's strobing like a mini disco light show, or it just basically falls down off the screen. Within the spirit of comment culture at the time and its practice of versioning, meaning a change or a translation from one thing to another through social interactions, that was very prominent with the then called surf clubs. Another person, Ben Cooley, was one of the first to respond to this series of videos. And instead of the play button, he now features the loading dots that signal the loading time, and he made that into his subject for his videos. So in 2009, I co-curated the exhibition Versions at the Netherlands Media Art Institute in Amsterdam. And we asked Constant to translate his work to a physical space. And he decided to version the online discussion by creating a physical copy of the loading dots, which you can see in the next slide. Now this became YouTube as a sculpture, perhaps as a homage or a physical translation of the online discussion. This time, 8 styrofoam balls were hung in a circle against the black background, lit one after the other by 8 spotlights and a simple disco light mixer. While the visitors were giving the feeling of entering a loading YouTube video, they started also filming the balls and uploaded again to YouTube. So the dialogue first occurred online, then offline, and returned in a way again to the web. And here other people, not even present in the exhibition, posted new video comments on other sort of spinning ball videos underneath the sort of original video that was made from the exhibition. Something that YouTube actually doesn't allow you to do anymore. So in a way, the process of versioning keeps continuing and keeps going on. Now, the idea of making internet processes material can be seen as a means of grasping a complex and continually changing world that shows its fragility and also the fleeting nature in a way of the work. And it could be argued that by creating such a physical object, the artists are attempting to transform the processual into a sort of poetic time freeze. However, I would say this neglects the notion that these artworks arise from collective processes that are situated in continuum with other works, references, and commentaries. These sort of assemblages then are characterized by the process of distribution and reuse of concepts and ideas, and they are moving between virtual and physical worlds. This is a very important issue for conservation, as it may have many consequences for the perception of the artwork. There are some challenges that relate to net art and its preservation. I think most of these are quite well known at the moment, but these are the sort of technical aesthetics that are changing, functioning that might be difficult to recognize. There's often problems with outdated hardware, code, or software. The maintenance can be very time-consuming and also very expensive. Participation by users can change the work, and work can also evolve into other projects and become part of a series of other works. Next of it is, of course, the speed of technical developments and the depth of breadth of different knowledge fields that needs to be tackled when you are trying to preserve these works. Now, one solution, I think, can be found in documenting the work, as was done by Olia Lina for her summer work, which can now also be seen as a screen video. Documentation of websites and their interaction is becoming more and more advanced. However, whereas indeed the videos on YouTube by Constant and Ben could be documented or saved in other ways, how to make sure their relation with the offline objects become parts of it as well as the wider context of this culture. For example, this culture of commenting. This would lead to a rather complex documentation strategy. And although I think it's an incredibly important area, as I've discussed and written about elsewhere, today again I would rather explore the potential of, rather than exploring the potential of documentation, I want to focus attention to the conceptual ideas behind many of these works, and in particular their distribution and versioning, and how those can be used when considering conservation methods for these works. So to briefly summarize in a way, whereas some museums have become very accustomed to the idea that artwork can no longer be presented with the original material or equipment, how to handle networks and versioning, who or what will be responsible, decisive, or accountable for artworks that are open, dispersed, distributed, and dependent on people outside of the scope of museum. I believe it's actually the latter that I'm talking about, the people outside of the museum that will provide one of the solutions. Now, these people are often described as amateurs. Especially in the last 15 years, we can see the rise of the amateur. And it has seen many versions, from lovers of cat videos to game enthusiasts and the so-called pro-ams, the professional amateurs. And all are seen as a sort of social product of their digital cultures. And even though at times amateurs are more and more recognized as professionals, they're still the outsider. As Kelly, for example, describes here as well, it's not the amateur in the sense of a lack of diligence, nor as it's professional in the sense of those who are in. The forces of technology, distribution, and cheap or free tools create a space for talent to do what talent wants to do. It creates a class of pro-amateur makers. However, though, what I think is more interesting is to look at how these pro-amateurs take action. So closer analysis of their work methods will show that often, and in particular in relation to conservation, these individuals are not merely just doing their thing, but are a combination of experts and non-specialists from different fields, backgrounds, and functions are building and evolving a dynamic and evolving network around specific issues or problems. For now, though, I want to stress this sort of collectivity and distribution in networks. Such a perspective, I think, will help to analyze the underlying structures of networks, and by seeing the individual and group as entities that influence each other and together constitute a constant process of becoming. In relation to the conservation of net art, I've come to use the term networks of care for such strategies. And you can see that from the cases I've analyzed that in some cases, artists are actively involved in building such a network. A good example is Mouchette by Martina Nedam. Here, a network emerges and evolves from the conceptual premise of the work. So, created in 1996, Mouchette.org is an interactive website. Initially, it was made by a pseudonymous character who calls herself Mouchette. And over the years, the project developed and evolved. Additional pages were added and other physical offline projects and events were organized. After many years of well-kept secrecy, in 2010, Martina Nedam decided to reveal herself as the author behind the work. And today, as is in 1996, on the homepage, the visitor is welcomed by a large bright flower and a small stamp site photo in the upper left corner. which shows a young girl looking down, presumably a picture of Mouchette. She still claims to be almost 13 years old, an artist and living in Amsterdam. The name Mouchette actually derives from the novel Nouvelle Histoire de Mouchette from 1937 by French author Georges Bernadotte, and the movie Mouchette made in 1967 by Robert Bresson, a free adaptation of the novel. In both accounts, Mouchette is a girl between childhood and adolescence, so indeed around 13 years. She leads a very harsh life. She's rejected by society, family, schools, and friends. She's raped by a trusted older man and also experiences the death of her mother. All these events leave her disheartened, and although never made explicit, the story ends with her suicide. The website mouchette.org takes many of the themes that play out in the book and the film and reperforms them in a contemporary setting, namely as an online diary with several project pages. And what initially appears to be a personal website of a female teenager evolves into darker themes of subsequent pages. Nedam uses some web characteristics in intricate ways to emphasize the drama and enigma of the story. For example, hyperlinks create confusing circulation, interactive possibility produce several layers of information, and identity play is performed in various ways. One of them is by allowing visitors to use the website for their own projects. They even have their own space in the Mouchette network. Or someone can build or reuse Mouchette in their own spaces, as was done, for example, here by Kurt Kloninger in 2001 when he started Mouchette Has a Posse. It was a collection of collaborative visual hacks that can be reused. This, in a way, malleability of the work is probably one of the reasons for the project's success, as several Mouchettes have indeed been created over the years. At the same time, as media scholar Wendy Chung explains, it's also one of the limitations, in the sense, though, that malleability makes criticism difficult by troubling a grounding presumption of humanities research. It can indeed, of course, be very difficult to judge the original. What happens when there is no original to refer to? When, or as in this case, there are many different versions, and even the artist doesn't quite remember what the work is. As Martine Nedam said in an interview, it's hard to say what constitutes Mouchette.org. Over the years, I've lost track of all the performances, projects, and objects that I made, but for sure, Mouchette is more than just a website. So rather than trying to preserve all the fragments, perhaps it's more interesting and necessary to look for other ways. And looking at the intention of the project, I think, may provide potential possibilities. As Nedam says here, Mouchette to her is a very playful interface. It enabled her to express herself about issues that she, as a non-native English-speaking person, would find difficult to articulate. So she created Mouchette.org as a social platform, a space where people can communicate or help other people. And over the years, as the project branches into several directions and dispersed, active people followed the work. These different individuals became very crucial at different and several points in time. For example, in early 2002, when Nedam launched a quiz. In the game, she compares the different characters from the film and the website with each other. However, the widow of Robert Bresson, the director of the film Mouchette, was not amused and sent Mouchette actually an official cease and desist letter in which she demanded that any reference to the film should be removed from the website. After Martine Nedam made this public via several emailing lists, several organizations and individuals stood up and they started to mirror the website or the project on their websites, where in most cases it can still be used today, more than 15 years later. This means, in a way, that users not only influence and assume ownership of the work, but they also take care of it, at least to a certain extent. The extent, of course, to which this happens will most likely shift in time and through different networks, because like the work itself, such a process keeps evolving. So what becomes clear is that the network of care is a social construction, and that this social life, in a way, is important for conservators. It's something that they will have to take into account and can benefit from. As researcher Kathleen Fitzpatrick also argues, a future preservation of digital objects may be less about new tools than new socially organized systems. So while Mouchet's network of care is still closely connected and controlled by Martine Nedam, this is less the case in the next example I want to show you, where the social life of the project expands and disperses in multiple directions that are often unforeseen. So for the next example, I've chosen a project that sits somewhere between art, popular culture, and design. And it's GeoCities, a free web hosting service that was founded in July 1995. At the time, it soon emerged as one of the most popular and inhabited places on the web. And it remained actually popular until the late 90s. At the peak of the dot-com fever, around the turn of the century, Yahoo purchased GeoCities. However, rather quickly, GeoCities became synonymous with old-fashioned aesthetics and basically bad taste. At the same time, people drifted to social network profiles that started to emerge as well. So a couple of years later, in April 2009, Yahoo announced that it was shutting down GeoCities within 6 months. During this time, the archive team managed to rescue almost 1 terabyte of GeoCities pages. And on 26th of October 2010, marking the first anniversary of GeoCities closing, the archive team released a torrent file of 641 gigabytes, which consisted of approximately 1.2 million accounts. It's approximately because still no one actually knows how many accounts are still available. Perhaps as a nice quote mentioned by digital archivist Jason Scott, the popularity of GeoCities was indeed, to those people that were doing it at the time, really breathtaking. So it became a symbol of the amateur web. GeoCities was a trace of how the web was used at a certain time. And this was also one of the main reasons that on the 1st of November in 2010, net artist Olia Lialina again and her partner Dragan Estenschied bought a 2 terabyte disk and started downloading the largest BitTorrent files of all time. A few months later, in January 2011, they were able to start unzipping the first files, a process which lasted until the end of March 2011. After downloading for this couple of months, storing and sorting the 16,000 archive GeoCities started. It took another year before they came up with the idea to redistribute the GeoCities homepages through the net. And this was done in different ways. They set up an automated Tumblr blog, which updates every 20 minutes with a new homepage, a screenshot of the homepage. And it's now an ever-growing series of front-page screen captures. And the screen captures with the most reposts and likes from their Tumblr followers are then presented with their new tags on their dedicated research page, the 1 terabyte of kilobyte each. And again, also distributed through Twitter. So the GeoCities archive became a spiral in a way, in which Olia and Dragan reflect on the Tumblr archive, of the torrent archive, of the GeoCities archive. People start reblogging, retweeting, liking, and saving it, and it just keeps going on. Through its liking, sharing, and redistribution, GeoCities keeps circulating. It pops up in new contexts all the time. So while, in a sense, GeoCities was almost a forgotten world in the web, due to these several enthusiasts and thousands of followers, it all of a sudden became not only visible, but also an important marker in the history of the web. Next, it also introduced a whole new taxonomy through tagging. For example, the tags alive or under construction of this new archival material could be categorized and analyzed, providing all kinds of information on how GeoCities was used, misused, in terms of framing, banners, navigation elements, GIFs, etc. So the project provides, I think, a very interesting means of archiving 500,000 screenshots. And the results of the project say much of the humor that still drives online culture, I think. So rather than purely collecting the material for the purpose of preservation, the project became about questioning what archive could mean in the context of also making work accessible. Some interesting questions come up. Whether the distribution qualities of a digital archive could change how the work was read, and if it could provide new meanings of work that was otherwise lost. And rather than existing as a static backlog of material, GeoCities has become a dynamic and still evolving project. As described by Dragon, this form of circulating the contemporary web was explicitly chosen as a curatorial and conservation method. Digital culture, as he said, is mass culture, and is also more about practices than objects. In order for artifacts to survive culturally, they need to become useful again in contemporary digital culture. Content that is isolated, decontextualized, and shoved around in databases of social networking sites is the main form of communication. To be a useful artifact has to work as a post. It has to become impartable and be brought into a format that is accepted everywhere, and that is a screenshot. So applied in this generative and circulatory way, an online archive keeps creating new forms and interpretations, at times pushed forward by humans, at other times by bots. Twitter, you might know, is supposed to have millions of bot accounts, which make up around at least 15% of all their accounts. So this carefully, in a way, designed, perhaps, mass reenactment. And while the screenshots may have some authenticity issues, as also acknowledged by Dragon, this is greatly outweighed by their accessibility and therefore also their impact. Moreover, experiencing the iconic, graphically impressive Netscape browser is something otherwise only achieved by complicated emulated setups. Yet, that is also something they do through their website, The Old Web Today, where you can still view and watch the screenshots in their original environment. So what can be learned from attitude as well? It is a combination, in a way, of professionals and non-experts who manage or work on a shared project. To enable the creation and administration of a project, the transmission of information is helped by a common mode of sharing. And everyone in the group has access to all the documents. Ideally, it would be an open system or a dynamic set of tools that is used and cared for where people can add, edit, and manage information, and also track changes that are made. Such a system can also be monitored by the network. An added bonus is that if something or someone leaves the project, it can still continue because the content and information is always accessible and part of the larger network. This also allows people to take control of a shared project, thus obtaining meaning from their sort of investments, to be able to share information and benefit from experiences and insight gained elsewhere. A network should, in the final instance, also be dynamic, so that individuals can easily move and projects can be merged or split into separate, smaller or specialized groups. Now, in a sense, though, this is not particularly new or even innovative. And an example here, for example, is the Robert Smithson Spiral Hill Broken Circle. It's a land art project that happened in several ways, in several places in the world. What such a network approach emphasizes is the necessity of connecting all users who are or become partly responsible for the management and accessibility of the work. As Vivian van Zazen here concludes in her research into the restoration of one of these land art projects, these kinds of projects are always about re-questioning and mediating. In other words, if we assume that these artworks for a large part are constantly changing, we must look for ways to facilitate variability, reinterpretation, and continuous processes. Now, interesting, this also comes from another perspective. For example, researchers at the Tate noted when looking at performance art that it's not necessarily the problem of non-materiality that currently represents the greatest challenge for museum in collecting performance, but of maintaining, conceived of as a process of active engagement, the networks which support the work. Now, I think this is a very interesting remark. And to add to that, I think it's also important that the network should not be seen as inherently part of the work and not as merely facilitating the work. So seeing the network as an actor rather than as a tool or a method turns the question of how individuals create a network to also questioning how networks care. And here I, in a way, follow the notion of care as described by Anna-Marie Moll in her ethnography of healthcare. She sees care as a practice that involves political, economic, and institutional power relations. More importantly, though, care is not a matter of making well-argued individual choices. It is something that grows out of collaborative and continuing attempts to attune knowledge and technology to diseased bodies and complex lives. Moll makes explicit what is that motivates care, an intriguing combination of adaptability and perseverance. Likewise, a network of care is a social construction, and to get a better understanding of the functioning of such a network, it is important to consider how it performs, how it changes, and how it produces new forms of care. So what does it mean? How can we put this into practice? How can we not only recognize a network of care, but also instigate it? While the idea of this network of care originated by analyzing existing practices, I also wondered whether it would be possible to create and sustain a network of care from an institutional point of view. And what would that mean? In an attempt to gain more insight into networks of care, I decided, together with researcher Karen de Wild, to choose a case study and analyze the different elements and actors, to learn more about the potential roles, the benefits and challenges of setting up and sustaining a network of care. And quite quickly, an ideal case study presented itself. And it's Brandon by Xuelia Chang, a Taiwanese artist. Brandon, and you will actually hear more about it in the series of talks, much more actually than I will talk about now. But the website started in around 1998. And it's about the life and death of Brandon Teena, a young American transgender man. Brandon was brutally assaulted and gang raped in the early 90s after his sexuality was revealed, and he was murdered a few days later in rural Nebraska. His death, along with similar cases, led to a national outcry and the lobby for a hate crime laws in the US. The website, created by Xuelia, was launched on the 30th of June 1998 by the Guggenheim Museum, and since then is widely recognized as an important landmark of net art. For Xuelia, it was a medium, and in particular its collaborative aspects that made the work interesting and also possible. As he states as well, Brandon's enduring importance stems from its highly collaborative structure, which incorporates contributions by numerous prominent scholars, artists, and programmers. And as also described by Matthew Fuller, Chang's method also includes creating context for the development of artistic languages to emerge. Such work implies that there is also an aesthetic of collaboration to be found, an activity core to her work. For instance, in the creation of common platforms or in the creation of the work by other artists, technologists, and musicians with whom she works. Well, indeed, the intention of the project was to create an interactive durational project that would be active for 1 year, in which multiple artists, authors, and organizations could collaborate. Involving these different collaborators, the project developed and became a dense artwork of which it was near impossible to have seen all the content. However, though, it didn't last very long before it went offline. After several years of recurrent inactivity and due to technical changes in the web, broken links, etc., Guggenheim started to restore the website in 2016. As they said, their intention was the process of restoring, studying, and preserving Brandon to contemporary audience must be as multidisciplinary as the work itself. involved media conservators, computer scientists, curators, and humanities scholars. We were very intrigued by the efforts and claim, and we set out to explore the different stakeholders involved in the project. And so we made a little bit of a historical timeline in a way, which shows you the creation part of Brandon, but also the restoration attempts that were done. And I think I made a mistake here, actually. The Guggenheim started in 2016 and it lasted till 2017 and not until 2018. So you can see that the project was part funded and initialized in a way already in 95 in Banff in Canada. The Guggenheim then finally commissioned it in 98, but previously also there were experiments done in Waag Society. At Harvard Society, it was taken up again and other things were added to the project. So several other organizations tried to keep the work functioning over the years. Some of them intentionally, such as Rhizome in 2005 and again in 2017. And also others unintentionally in a way, like the Internet Archive. They're used to back up the sites through the Wayback Machine. What is interesting though, I think, with Brandon, it's not just a website. Similar to Mouchette.org, it also consisted of physical installations and performances. And since the artwork was distributed, it became increasingly difficult to recognize the boundaries of the work. What belongs to the project? What doesn't? Who owns the authorship? And who can control the work, take care of it? Is it still possible to refer to the work as one project? Or would it need to be seen as a living network? In their preservation efforts, the Guggenheim decided to focus on the project they had in their collection, which was the website. And their aim was to reinstate Brandon's intended online experience and interactivity as a living artwork, while preserving all functional behaviors and aesthetic properties of the work as defined by the original source code. As I mentioned before, you will hear much more about in much more detail in the next lectures as well. Yeah, there were also several challenges, we think, undermining the sort of full restoration of the work. While the website is part of the permanent collection of the Guggenheim Museum, the residues of the offline events are not. So while Brandon could be reconstructed and studied through documentation and residues that remain within the archives of different institutions, for example, there's some information in Amsterdam or in New York in the field libraries, not all archives are easily accessible, or not all information is processed accurately, or at all, I would say even. So this poses many problems for art historical analysis about the work, as it risks to radically altering the work that did not only manifest itself solely online. So while the identity of a project would likely best preserve it include all both physical and virtual archives, another question that intrigued me is how to preserve and give agency to the machinic in a way that acknowledges it as part of an actor of the work. While this may not have been crucial to the current version of Brandon, in some cases, machinic elements such as algorithms or bots can continue perhaps some of the work, as we saw in the GeoCities circulation of the homepages. So this question then expands in a way to whether, and if so, in what way, can a network of care become perhaps a sort of non-conscious cognitive assemblage, to use Catherine Hill's terminology. In a way, a collaboration between humans and non-humans to preserve itself. Perhaps this is answered in yet another project by Julia Chang. In her work around fungi and as part of the Mycelium Network Society. Here they experiment with the conductive qualities and characteristics of myceliums, which begin interacting with the interferences and inconsistencies of electronic radio waves, to which they have been introduced, responding slowly and carefully to their environments while preserving their own longevity. Perhaps such a non-conscious cognitive assemblage might provide interesting potentiality for our future digital sustainability, or at least for thinking about what it means to be digital sustainable. In this sense, I think a network cares. And referring to shared resources and goals, the term then includes social relations and negotiations that are necessary to produce and maintain a network. And again, following Anne-Marie Moore's care as a practice, or as I would say, a method, it involves questions that's around different power relations. And most importantly, I think care is not only a matter of making these well-argued individual choices, as I said before. It's really something that grows out of collaborative and continuing attempts to attune knowledge and technologies to complex social relations. So, in conclusion, I think a network of care is an intriguing combination of adaptability and perseverance. It's a constructive research field in which social, political, economic, ecological, and technical issues overlap in very complex ways. And I think this is where we can find really interesting answers by addressing these different fields and developments. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Annette. I'm sorry, I'm still digesting. It's so fruitful.
Absolutely, I can imagine.
Yeah. And still want to welcome if there's any question from on site. And because I noticed some few faces that I know, and if no, I will start with a question that, because in terms of conserving net art and let's say contemporary art that constantly facing social engagement and the obsolete and the changing of technology, I do feel there's a common sense of, let's say, a net art that created last year. Does it really mean that it's not in risk if we want to acquire that? I think it's rather a very practical question, but to reflect to all these ride-on and connection to what you mentioned about the authorship or different platforms, do you think is there a structural or statistic way to make it more systematic to do the risk assessment for an institute who is wanted to acquire a net art?
Yeah. Well, it's a really difficult question, of course, but an absolutely important one, as you said yourself as well. It's usually, this is the practice that most conservators are dealing with. So I can think about it from a theoretical point of view, but of course the practice is more volatile in a way. So what I think and what I've seen happening in a way is that versioning control is much used in instances when people are trying to preserve these works. So they can quite easily track what decisions were made in order to change this work. And from what I've known and heard from Brandon's restoration, that has always been an important part of that restoration process, is to really systematically use versioning as a system to keep track of all the changes that were made and the decisions that were made at the same time. So I think it's there that versioning really is helpful. With regard to how to be more structural and systematized in a way, it's very difficult, of course, because as basically with any artwork, these are unique pieces. So you will always have certain things that you will have to be, that it will be case specific. Yet on the other side, a lot of net art or media art or digital art in that sense has many similarities as well. So there's certainly things that can be standardized. In looking, for example, at the certain softwares that are used, I mean, there's, for example, in the past, a lot of works have been made by Flash or even Adobe Director. And now those systems are hard to maintain in a way. Some of them don't even work anymore. But solutions are found and dealt with. And I think those can be standardized as well. Those methods can be standardized and quite easily be transferred to other people. So you come to a sort of more structural solution. When it comes to risk assessment, though, yeah, it is extremely difficult. And what I've heard now with museums is that initially they tend to think like, oh, net art or digital art is rather cheap to acquire, and it is in most cases. I mean, the value of these kind of art is much less so than the more typical sort of painting or sculptural works. Yet, though, what is problematic and quite soon already becomes the maintenance of these works, which is actually increasing in time rather than decreasing.
Mm-hmm.
So while the initial budget might not be necessarily a huge amount, the maintenance quite quickly increases. And so that's something to certainly keep in mind. And it's hard to predict how quickly or how far that increase will go, of course. That remains really to be seen, and it's really dependent on all kinds of factors, of course, on how the work is made. Is it made in open source? Is it made with proprietary software, etc.? So that is always difficult to judge. So what I'm trying to show with these examples as well is that some things, and that's of course the examples that I'm focusing on, cannot be preserved. It's just undoable. So we have to then start thinking about new ways of leaving a legacy in a way. And that kind of steps away also of the technical rat race in a way that we're following to update and constantly do more in a way.
Yeah, but I think that will be going back to the question about redefining what does collecting net art means.
Mm-hmm.
And we have anonymous for a question on Slido that I will repeat the sentence. Based on your research, what's the point that shouldn't be neglected when conserving or archiving net art, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think to me, what is still very important is the intention of the artist. I still think you need to have a really close conversation, if possible, of course, with the artist about the work, and find out, like, okay, what are the main elements in the work that need to be preserved? And in some cases, these can be technical elements that they can say, well, the code is actually crucial for the work and that should not be changed whatsoever. In other cases, it might indeed be something much more performative, like, okay, we want this work to be to circulate. And if that question comes up, then you have something completely different to deal with. So I think it's really trying to get at the core of the work. What is it really that is important in this work? And for example, there might be conflicting things, of course, as well. As in Mouchette, for example, Martine Nedam said that she doesn't like the code to be completely changed. She likes the sort of authorly kind of guiding of the code as well. On the other hand, she also says, like, well, Mouchette was very much about communication, so it's also a communication device. So here you come into conflict in a way, and it's, I think, quite interesting then to see, where to draw the line. And I think in that sense, the task of a conservator also becomes much more curatorial. Is that what do you decide for? So it's assessing and appraising in a way what you kind of choose.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a feedback on this question because me and Zichen, we did a few artist interview, and we know it's important to have artists involved. But as you also mentioned, that artists might not remember. And when you are dealing with artists that is really thinking about like creating something at the moment, then it's really hard to tell that when you have an artist involved, the person is thinking about creating or adding new type of intent into the previous work. And then, in my opinion, in curation point of view, it doesn't really matter for the outcomes, but from conservation point of view, the end result, how do you see how to decide it's successful or not.
Yeah. I mean, for me, that is of course very difficult. I think what we have to realize and become more and more aware of, that there is no success factor, because success will change. What we call today a success story will be a different success story in 10 years. And so I think we need to get rid of the idea of this sort of static idea of, well, there is an ideal version, because there is just no ideal version. Because then you immediately have to ask yourself, well, ideal in, whose vision? Who decides that this is the ideal version? It's a moment in time. So conservation in that sense is also very time-based. And we've learned from time-based media, in a sense, also, like it's a certain period that is very relevant. And conservation could also much more adhere, I think, in that idea of, okay, it's time-based. Today we do this. Tomorrow we might do something else. And it's reiterating that, I think, which becomes really important. And on the other hand, what I think, because also a lot of people always, question me about, well, do you think net art should be in the museum at all? Maybe it shouldn't be there, And I think that's not true. For me, it's super important that net art actually becomes part of museum collections, because museums have a lot of expertise. They, for example, you mentioned as well, it's like where you do the interviews with the artist, you build a relationship with artists through time. It's not like one time you talk to someone and the next day you forgot about them. There is, particularly in the conservation department, there's a very strong tradition of building relationships with artists. To talk through time on certain moments in time with the artist to see what to do with an artwork. And so also to capture these changing dilemmas in a way. So I think that is the main thing, and answering then what does collecting net art means is much more for the museum following indeed sort of trajectory rather than seeing it as a project. And I think that is still one of the dangers of net art in museums, that it's now mostly funded through project funding, which isolates it again. And these needs to become more trajectories than projects in a way, in which you follow through things in a more sustainable way. So I think it's through time where the museum is actually really important and becomes a really important player in perhaps this, whatever this network of care might consist of.
And I think because of time, I will follow up with the last question. I think is a reason about sustainable network that the old presentation and with the Brandon's case, that is a project together with Guggenheim and New York University. But is there already also this kind of network in the Netherlands or in the Europe?
Yeah, I think what the Guggenheim has done with the NYU, and the NYU has also collaborated earlier with MoMA, I think super important. And they're really exemplary in that sense. And I know of several attempts that are made in Holland, for example, of these types of collaborations. But again, these tend to fixate around specific projects. So they don't have a very long memory in a way. What I do see in Holland, particularly, I think what is valuable in contemporary art, there's a very strong connection between the museums. They discuss a lot about the conservation of contemporary art, and now more and more also around digital art. So I do see a movement in that direction. But I do also tend to see it as a sort of museum's affair, rather than also including other voices. I think that is still something to be much more practiced in a way. And I think here Guggenheim is a really fantastic example of how this actually works.
Yeah. Do you see yourself as a museum field person, or? rather outside museum field person.
Yeah, no, I think I've always situated myself outside of the museum, and from the curator becoming now much more the researcher, looking into what the museum does perhaps, and what others do, and how to make that into a combined effort.
Yeah, I'm also looking forward this kind of cross field connection will be happening more in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So any other question from outside? If no, thank you today, Anna Decker.
Thank you.
Hopefully we can see your face more in the future.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
一朵现场的观众，
现场，
我们还在吗？我们讲座其实就差不多到这个时间，然后不知道现场有没有观众还想要再跟我们两个聊一下的。对，然后工商一下，下个星期三跟下个星期三晚上，就是刚刚 Anna 最后提到的 Brandon 这一件作品的比较完整的修复的案例。但其实我个人之前在写硕士论文的时候找到的文献，其实最早，应该是2013年吧，那个叶景瑞老师的。出版品里面其实就有翻译1、2篇，当时好像有在修复这件作品的文章。可是后来我们2015年到古根汉跟这一位 Jonathan 询问了以后，他其实个人认为当时那个时候的对他来说并不叫做修复，那比较像是几个工程师尝试的去修正一些语法。所以这样子的行为其实对 conservation 来讲，它并不是 conservation。所以到底所谓 conservation 的 restoration 跟你找一个工程师，然后去修正一些语法，让一些 function 能够回复，就像你平常在维护自己的网站一样的差别是什么？其实是我们也非常期待能够听到，然后包含说他们直接跟 computer science 这样子，拥有很 strong 的技术背景的。学校单位是合作的话，那是不是其实像这样子的模式，台湾如果目前我还不知道台湾有没有 gallery 或者是美术馆有在典藏或是代理网络艺术的，如果有的话，请告诉我。那可能会是一个台湾也可以去效法的模式这样子。那因为我听不到现场现在的状况，所以就跟大家说再见。
我们第二场的部分，我们第二场部分其实比较着重在，就是我们刚讲到宇轩讲到那个 Jonathan 这位，现在在古根汉美术馆担任他算研究员的一个，
他们那个叫做 fellow，
对，
对，
然后他会先借由他个人的一个经验，然后到说他为什么开始转到接触到媒体艺术成为媒体艺术修复师这样子的一个脉络下，然后再到这个案例的讲解，然后再第三场就会是整个针对他们技术上操作的一些细节在做分享，那这就是我们未来2场的一个讲座，也希望大家也可以再来参与，
谢谢，
谢谢大家，
拜拜，晚安，
拜拜。